The place cards were mine, all 140 of them, cut and lettered and dried flat under weights on my kitchen table over 9 evenings. And I had walked the length of the top table twice that morning, making sure not one of them sat crooked. It was the 14th of September, 20 past 3, and my sister Beatrix was getting married in a church whose bells I could hear from my own doorstep. I was standing at the back with my daughter's hand in mine, close to the door, the way I have stood in every room for 9 years. Marnie was 8, and she had asked, twice, whether the bells were going to be loud. Then a woman in a gray coat came up the side aisle and stopped level with us and did not go on. She did not look at me. She looked at the child. And in a church with 200 people in it, she said 4 words out loud. "I'm not going anywhere." I had heard that sentence before.
Welcome, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
I had heard it in a doorway when I was 19 years old, in the rain, and every single thing I built after that was built on the belief that it had been a lie. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Let me back up. If I leave it there, you will think this is a story about a wedding, and it is not. The wedding took 40 minutes. The rest of it took 9 years, and I was awake for most of them. My name is Nell Ambrose, and I read handwriting, not the way a fortune teller does. I do not tell you that your loops mean you are secretive. I mean something duller and much more useful. Give me 6 lines of a person's hand, and I will tell you whether they were standing or sitting, whether the paper was on a hard surface or on their knee, which hand they held the pen in, roughly how tall they are, and whether they slowed down anywhere. People think handwriting is a picture of a personality. It is not. It is a recording of a body. A tall woman writing at a low table pushes her downstrokes to the left because her wrist is at the wrong angle. A person telling the truth writes at 1 speed. A person copying something writes at 2. I learned that before I learned to ride a bicycle because I was raised in a lettering shop. Ambrose & Son sits on a wet street near the old lock, 4 doors down from a chandler that has been closing for 11 years. There has never been a son. My great-grandfather put it on the fascia in 1896 because he thought it looked more solid, and 4 generations of Ambrose women have lettered other people's important days underneath a name that does not include a single one of us. My mother thinks that is funny. I have never once heard her laugh at it. We do memorial inscriptions, ship's registers, presentation books, the flat brass plates that go under portraits in town halls, and weddings. Weddings are the money. Invitations, orders of service, place cards, the register page itself, which is the only piece of lettering in this trade that a person will look at every year for the rest of their life. The first thing you should know about my mother is that she is the best engraver in 3 counties, and everyone, including me, agrees about that. Adela Ambrose can cut a line into copper so fine you need a glass to see the edge of it. She has done it for 39 years, and her hands are perfectly steady, and she has never, not once, produced a piece of work she was ashamed of. She used to stand behind me when I was 7 with her thumb between my shoulder blades saying, "Lift, lift," until I stopped dragging my elbow on the bench. The second thing you should know about her is that she taught me to copy a hand. That is a legitimate skill in this trade. A family brings you a register from 1922 with 4 generations already written in it, and they want the 5th to match, so you learn to read a stranger's letter form and put your pen inside it. My mother could do it better than anyone. She taught me at 14 on a memorial book, and she said one thing while she did it that I have never been able to put down. Anyone can copy the letters, nobody can copy the spacing. She meant it as craft. The spacing between letters is not decided by the hand. It is decided by the eye, and the eye is decided by how tall you are, and how far your head sits from the page, and 100 things you have never thought about once. You can practice a letter form for a month and get it. You cannot practice the gap. The gap is a fingerprint. Remember that. It is 9 years away, and it is the whole thing. The third thing about my mother is the part I did not understand until I was 28. So I am going to give it to you the way I got it, which is late. In 1984, Ambrose and Son cut the inscription band for a bell, a big one, a tenor, going into a tower 40 miles east. My grandmother did the work. 8 months later, the bell cracked on its second full peal, and it cracked through the inscription band, and there was an inquiry, and the inquiry found that the crack had started at a casting flaw and had nothing whatever to do with the lettering. That is the finding. That is what the paper says. I have read it. It did not matter. What people remembered was that the Ambrose girl cut the band and the bell broke. We did not get another foundry job for 19 years. My grandmother died in the back room of that shop, still telling anyone who came in that it was the casting. The foundry was Lindqvist. I met Vesper Lindqvist on a Thursday in March when I was 19 and had been out of my apprenticeship for 5 weeks. She came into the shop at 8:10 in the morning, which is before we open, because the door was unlocked, and she is a person who tries doors. She was 26 then. She had on a canvas work coat with the sleeves pushed back, and there was rust on both her forearms up to the elbow. Actual rust. Orange. The way you only get it if you have spent the morning inside something iron. She was tall enough that she came in slightly bent, out of habit, the way people are who work in towers. She put a rubbing on the counter, not a photograph, a rubbing, done properly on tissue with a soft graphite stick, of the inscription band of a bell. Then she said, "I need to know if this can be saved." I did not know who she was. I want to be clear about that, because later it mattered enormously to several people that I had not known. I looked at the rubbing for about 90 seconds, and then I told her the truth, which was that the letters were fine, that the wear was all on the upper serifs, which meant water had been getting in from above for at least 60 years, and that whoever cut it had been left-handed and shorter than me. She said, "How can you possibly know that last one?" I said, "The gap." She stayed 40 minutes. My mother was in the back cutting a plate and did not come out, because when she is cutting, she does not come out for anything, and I have thought about that 40 minutes more than I have thought about almost any other 40 minutes of my life. Vesper Lindqvist ran a bell-hanging firm, which I had not known was a job. She did not cast bells. Her family had stopped casting in 91. What she did was take them down and rehang them and get the tuning back, and she was the 4th generation to do it. and the first woman to run it. And she said that last part, the way you say a thing, you have had to say a great many times. Before she left, she did something I have watched her do perhaps 1,000 times since. She put 2 fingers flat on the counter, just the pads, index and middle, laid down like she was taking a pulse, and left them there for a second before she picked up her bag. I asked her about it once, months later. She said a bell hanger does it to feel for the hum. If a frame is loose, everything in the tower carries it, and you can feel it in a beam before you can hear it. She said she had stopped noticing she did it by the time she was 20. I noticed it every single time. She came back 9 days later with a different rubbing that she did not need read. I'm not going to give you all 14 months. I will give you the shape of them because the shape is what got broken. We were careful in a way that neither of us admitted was careful. She did not come to the shop again after the 3rd time. We met at Towers. That sounds romantic, and it was not remotely. It was cold, and it was usually 6 in the morning, and I spent a great deal of it sitting on a stone step in a coat with a flask, while a woman 40 feet above me shouted numbers down a shaft at a man called Doggett. But here is what a tower is. A tower is a place with one way in and a door at the bottom. And once you are up in it, the whole world is 8 inches of Louvre and a lot of weather. You cannot be interrupted in a bell tower. You can only be arrived at, and you hear it coming for 90 seconds. For 14 months, that was the only place in my life where nobody could arrive. She marked me on the 2nd of November in the ringing chamber of a church whose name I am not going to say, because it is still standing and people still get married in it. I want to be careful here, because this is a thing that gets talked about badly. A bond mark is not a decision made in a moment. It is the end of a long argument you have both already had. She asked me 3 separate times over 5 weeks. And the 3rd time she asked, she said that if I wanted her to stop asking, she would stop asking, and it would not change a single thing about how she came to the door. I said yes on a Tuesday with my back against a wall that was 400 years old and my hands full of the collar of her coat. Afterwards, she sat on the floor of the ringing chamber with her head against my knee, and I put my fingers into her hair, into the white streak at her left temple that every Lindqvist has had since anyone was keeping paintings of them. And she said the sentence, "I'm not going anywhere." My mother found out on the 19th of December, and she found out from a piece of paper, which I have always thought was the cruelest available detail. I had left a job bag on the bench. Inside it was a proof of an inscription band, a rehang at a church out past the reservoir, Vesper's job, brought to me the ordinary way through the ordinary channel because by then we had stopped pretending that was a coincidence. On the docket, in the client box, somebody at her end had written Lindqvist and Daughters in full. My mother came out of the back room holding it at arm's length like it was wet. She did not shout. I need you to understand that she has never once shouted. She said, "How long?" I told her the truth, which was 14 months, and I told her the truth about the 2nd of November as well, which I did not have to do, and which I have gone back to a great many times. She looked at my neck for about 4 seconds. Then she went and got the shop keys off the hook and locked the front door in the middle of a working morning, which she had done twice before in my life, once for a funeral. What she said then took 11 minutes, and I can still do most of it from memory. She said that she had spent 39 years getting the name back. She said that when she took over, there were 4 firms in the county who would not take an Ambrose quote, and that now there were none, and that she had done it 1 plate at a time, and that not one person in my generation understood what that had cost because I had grown up inside the finished version of it. She said that my grandmother had died with people still saying it was the lettering. And then she said the thing that ended the argument, which was, "You have put your neck under the hand of the family that let her die with that on her." I said the wrong thing. I want to be honest about that because it would be very easy to tell you this story with myself entirely in the right. And it was not like that at 4 o'clock on the 19th of December. I said, "Nobody outside this room has thought about that bell in 20 years. 2 days later, she put a sheet of paper on the bench in front of me. Ambrose laid paper, our own watermark, ruled up in pencil, the way we rule up everything. It was 3 lines long. It said, in the flat legal phrasing she uses for probate work, that the undersigned withdrew from all understanding, formal or informal, with the person named, and undertook to make no further approach." There was a space at the bottom. She had ruled the line for my signature herself, which is a thing she does for clients as a courtesy. And seeing it there ruled and waiting is one of about 6 images from that year that I still cannot look at directly. She said, "Sign it and it is finished and we never discuss it again." I said no. She said, "Take a day." I took 9 days. And on the 29th of December, I said no again. And that is when it happened. It was a Thursday. It had been raining since about 2 in the afternoon, the flat gray kind that does not blow anywhere, and by 10 at night the gutter on our side of the street had given up and was going over in 3 places. My mother came upstairs at 20 past 10. She stood in the doorway of my room with her hands folded, and she said, "I have thought about it, and I find I cannot have it in the house." I said, "Have what in the house?" She said, "Any of it." Here is the part people always want to know about, so I will do it plainly, and then I will not do it again. There were 2 crates in a canvas bag. She had packed them herself that afternoon while I was at the shop, and she had packed them properly because she is not a person who does anything badly, and that is somehow the worst sentence in this entire story. My clothes were folded. My grandmother's ruling pen was rolled in its cloth with the nib guard on. She had put my certificates in a document wallet flat so they would not crease. She carried the first crate down herself and set it on the pavement outside the gate. I did not believe it while it was happening. That is the thing nobody tells you. I stood in the hall with my coat half on, believing, in an absolutely calm way, that this was a demonstration, and that in about 6 minutes she would come back in, and we would both be embarrassed, and it would never be mentioned again. She came back in twice, once for the second crate and once for the bag. The third time she came back in, she shut the gate, and she turned the key in it, and then she went along the inside of the railings and put the bolt across on the yard door as well. And I understood from the second bolt that it was not a demonstration. You do not do the second bolt for a demonstration. I was 19 years and 4 months old, and I had 11 pounds in a phone with about 1/5 of a charge on it. I stood at the railings, and I said a lot of things I am not going to repeat, and my mother stood 4 feet away on the other side of them under the porch light, out of the rain, with her arms folded, and let me. When I stopped, she said 7 words. "You'll be back before the shop opens." Then she went inside and put the hall light off. The crates were already soaking. That is the detail that has stayed. Ambrose laid paper is not cheap, and I had 4 sheets of it in the top of the second crate. And I remember standing there in the rain in the dark, doing the arithmetic on 4 sheets of paper. I got the crates under the chandler's canopy 4 doors down. It took 3 trips. On the 3rd trip, a man I did not know came out of the flat above the chandler in a dressing gown and helped me with the 2nd crate without saying anything at all, and then went back inside. And I have never found out who he was. And if he is alive, I would like him to know that it was the only kind thing that happened that night. I want to tell you what I did next, because for 9 years I told it wrong, even to myself. The true version is this. I sat under that canopy until about 4:30 in the morning, and I did not call Vesper Lindqvist. Not because I was proud, although I was, because a bond is not a rope. It is a set of assumptions, and every one of mine had just been taken out of the wall and put on the pavement, and the assumption I could not risk testing at 4:30 in the morning was the one where she came. If I called her and she came, everything held. If I called her and she came, and she looked at the 2 crates and the canvas bag and the whole arithmetic of it, a 19-year-old with 11 pounds and a family behind a bolted gate, and something in her face moved, even for a quarter of a second, in the direction of how much is this going to be, then the bond was still there, and it would simply have a hole in it that I would be able to see for the rest of my life. So I did not call. I went to Rosamond Peaks at 5 in the morning instead, because Rosamond lives above what used to be the bindery, and because Rosamond has been finishing Ambrose work since 1971, and because she is the only person on that street who is not afraid of my mother. Rosamond Peak was 65 then, and she opened the door in a hairnet, and she looked at me, and she looked past me at the crates on the pavement, and she said, "Right," and went to put the kettle on. She did not ask a single question for 4 days. On the 5th day, she asked one. She said, "Does she know?" I said, "No." Rosamond said, "Then you have made yourself the only person carrying it, and I want you to notice that you chose that." I stayed 9 weeks. I got a room over a laundrette on the far side of the lock, which is where the money went, and I got work, not shop work. Nobody on that street would have taken me, and I would not have asked. I got a job lettering for a printer 12 miles away who did not know or care whose daughter I was. And I wrote to Vesper twice in January and got nothing back. On the 11th of February, I went to find her. I want you to have this properly because it is the hinge of 9 years. She was on a rehang at Stonebridge, which is a squat little church with a saddleback tower and a car park you can see the whole west side from. I knew the job. I knew it because I had lettered the band for it in October, and I had put a serif on the final S that was slightly wrong, and had been quietly hoping for 4 months that nobody would ever notice. I got there at about 2:30. The truck was there, and the gin was up over the tower door, and there were 4 of them working. I could hear Doggett shouting, and Vesper was standing on the flat by the porch with a clipboard, and there was a woman beside her in a good coat, and the woman had her hand around Vesper's forearm. above the elbow, the way you hold someone you are entitled to hold, not touching, holding. Vesper did not move her arm. I know exactly what that was now. I have known for 9 years, less about 4 days. That was Freya Sandoy. Her father owns the foundry at Marley that Lindqvist buy their castings from, and there had been a plan on both sides since Vesper was about 22. And Freya was on that flat at 2:30 on the 11th of February because she was on every flat because that was what the plan involved. And Vesper did not move her arm because Vesper had been told 6 weeks earlier in writing on Ambrose laid paper with our watermark in it that she was to make no further approach. But I did not know that. I stood at the far end of a car park in February, and I read the only thing in front of me, which was a hand above an elbow and an arm that did not move. I turned around and I went back to the bus. 3 weeks after that, I found out I was pregnant. I'm going to move quickly through the next 8 years because they were mine and because you did not come here for them, but you need 4 things out of them, or the rest will not land. The first is Marnie. She was born on the 16th of October at 2:20 in the afternoon, and she came out furious, and she has stayed roughly that temperature ever since. Rosamond was in the corridor. Nobody else was. At about 4 days old, the hair at her left temple came in white, not gray, white. A strip about the width of 2 fingers, running back from the hairline, absolutely distinct from the rest of it, which is Ambrose brown. The midwife said the word for it and said it was nothing, that it runs in families, that it can skip 4 generations in land. I knew exactly which family it ran in. I had had my fingers in it. The second thing is what I told her about it. She asked when she was 5 in a shop window, looking at herself. I said it came from her great-grandmother. I said it in a completely level voice while looking at a display of lampshades, and I have never once corrected it. I am not going to defend that. I'm going to tell you why I thought it was true, which is a different thing. I believed on the 11th of February in a car park that I had been left. Not that there had been a mistake, left. And a woman who has been left does not go to the tower at 7 months pregnant to be looked at kindly. She builds a different building, so I built it. And once you have told a 5-year-old that her hair comes from a dead woman, you have put a load-bearing wall in, and you do not take those out at 11 at night because you feel bad. The third thing is the work. I got good. I want to say that without dressing it up. In 8 years, I got better than my mother at the one narrow thing, which is reading a hand. Engraving is hers and always will be. But I do register restoration now and probate authentication. And twice a year, a solicitor sends me something in a plastic sleeve and asks whether the same person wrote both halves of it. I am on a list. There is an actual list. Nell Ambrose, letter form, and a phone number. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a triumph either. You get very good at reading a hand when you have spent your 20s wanting one specific answer out of a piece of paper. The fourth thing is that I did not speak to my mother for 8 years and 1 month. Not from spite. It simply turned out that the first move was enormous, and neither of us made it. And then it was 2 years. And then a thing that size stops being a decision and becomes a piece of furniture. And then in March, my sister Beatrix rang me. Bea is 4 years younger than me. She was 15 the night of the crates, and she was asleep. and she has never entirely forgiven herself for being asleep, which is absurd, and which I have told her is absurd, approximately 200 times. She got out at 18 in a much more ordinary way, and she trained as a physiotherapist, and she is, of the two of us, the functional one. She came to the laundrette flat every fortnight for 8 years. She was in the corridor with Rosamond. She is Marnie's favorite person alive, and I have made my peace with that. On the 4th of March, she rang me, and she was crying in the way you cry when it is good. And she said she was getting married. I said the correct things. Then she said the name, Juno Lindqvist. I put the phone against my collarbone for about 4 seconds so she would not hear what I was doing with my breathing. There are, I later established, 11 Lindqvists in the county. Juno is the youngest of 3. Vesper is the eldest. There are 9 years between them, which means that when I was sitting on stone steps at 6 in the morning with a flask, Juno Lindqvist was 17, and I never met her once. B did not know. That is the thing. B was 15 and asleep, and by the time she was old enough to ask, our mother had aversion and I had silence, and between those two things, nobody ever said the name Lindqvist to Beatrix Ambrose in her life. I said, B, I need to tell you something, and you are going to want to sit down for it. It took an hour and 10 minutes, and she took it better than I would have. At the end of it, she was very quiet. And then she said, Vesper, in the flat way you say a word you have heard 400 times and are now hearing for the first time. Then she said, she's at every family dinner. She's coming Thursday. Then she said, Nell, Marnie's got the streak. Here is what my sister did, and I want it on the record because a great many people in this story behaved badly and she did not. She said she would call it off, not the wedding, the family. She said she would tell Juno tonight, and they would do it at a register office in a different county with 4 people, and I would let her nothing, and we would all be spared. I said no. Why I said no is the only part of this I have never been able to explain properly to anyone who was not there. Partly it was that I had already taken one thing off B, 8 years of a normal family, by being the reason there was a hole in it, and I was not going to take her wedding as well. But mostly it was smaller and worse than that. For 9 years I've been carrying one question, and the question was not, does she still want me? The question was, did she look at the crates? Did she come and see it and choose? And there was suddenly a version of the next 6 months in which I would be in rooms with that woman and would be able to watch her hands in her face and would be able to find out. I have since had to admit that I said yes to lettering that wedding for a reason that had nothing to do with my sister. I told B I would do the stationery, all of it, on one condition: that nobody prepared anybody. No warning phone call to the Lindqvists, no gentle briefing, nothing. If I was going to read a face, I needed to read it cold. B said that was a terrible idea. B was right. The Ambrose Commission was announced at the Lindqvist Thursday dinner on the 11th of March by Juno, who is 26 and delightful, and has the emotional radar of a lamppost, and who said, and I am quoting, B's sister does the fancy writing, she's brilliant, she's doing the whole lot. Vesper, I am told, said, Ambrose, and Juno said, yeah, Nell. Nobody at that table thought anything of it. It went past. They talked about parking. 6 days later, a woman in a canvas work coat came into the printer's yard 12 miles from anywhere at 7:30 in the morning because I was on the 6 to 2 and because she is a person who tries doors. She had rust on her forearms. That is the detail my stupid body picked out of everything available in the first half second, not the face. The rust, orange to the elbow, exactly the same. 9 years later, which meant she had been inside something iron since about 5. She was 35 now. The white at her temple had come further back. She was standing about 11 feet away between 2 pallets of board, and she had stopped there, which I understood was deliberate because 11 feet is a distance you choose. She said, "I didn't know until Thursday." I said, "I know. Juno told the whole table." She said, "That isn't what I meant." She had come to say one thing, and she said it in about 90 seconds, standing between the pallets without moving any closer. She said that she was going to be at a large number of events over the next 6 months. She said that she was not going to reduce her attendance because Juno was her sister, and doing that would require an explanation, and the explanation would land on B. She said she assumed I felt the same about B. Then she said, "So I want to agree something." What she proposed was this. She would not ask me a single question about the last 9 years, not one. Not how have you been, not where did you go, not what happened. She would be civil in company, she would be useful if there was lifting, and she would not at any point in any room raise it. And in exchange, she asked me for exactly nothing. I said, "Why?" And she said the sentence that I spent the following 6 weeks taking apart at 2 in the morning. She said, "Because I've had 9 years of deciding what you meant, and I would rather have none of you than get it wrong twice." Then she put 2 fingers flat on the top palette, index and middle, just the pads, for about a second, and she left. I want to be extremely clear about what I believed at that moment, standing in a printer's yard at 20 to 8 in the morning, because everything I did for the next 6 weeks came out of it. And all of it was wrong. I believed she was managing me. I believed that a woman who had let a hand sit above her elbow in a car park in February had gone on and built a life, and that the life had a Freja Sandeau in it, and that I had turned up in the middle of it, attached to her little sister's wedding like a piece of weather. And I believed the agreement was a fence. 9 years of reading handwriting for a living, and I could not read a woman standing 11 feet away in a yard because she had told me the truth. She just told me the true version of a sentence I had the wrong half of. She had had 9 years of deciding what I meant, by which she meant a letter. The perimeter held for 6 weeks. I'm going to give you those 6 weeks in some detail, because they are the part of this story I would keep if I could only keep one part, and because I did not understand while I was inside them that they were the good bit. There were 11 events. I counted because I am my mother's daughter. And I count things. 2 dress fittings that I had no business at and was invited to anyway. A cake tasting. 4 Thursday dinners at the Lindqvist house, which is a long, low farmhouse with a yard full of gin poles and chain, where everyone eats in the kitchen and there is always at least one bell component on the table. The church walk-through, 2 evenings of envelope stuffing at B's flat, and the rehearsal. Vesper came to 9 of the 11. She missed the cake tasting and 1 dinner, both for work, both genuinely. And both times she sent a message to Juno saying so. And both times I found out that I had checked. At the first Thursday dinner, she was already there when we arrived. And she stood up when B came in, and then she said, "Nell," with a very short nod, and sat back down and passed the potatoes to her mother. That was it. That was the whole thing. I had spent 4 days building 9 different versions of that moment, and the real one lasted a second and a half and involved potatoes. Here's what I mean by the perimeter in practice. Over 6 weeks, that woman did not ask me one single question about my life. She asked me about paper. She asked me at length and with real interest about the difference between vellum and parchment for a register page, and whether a modern ink would sit on a 19th century size. She asked whether I could match the hand in the Lindqvist family book, which goes back to 1840 and has 4 different women's writing in it and 1 man's. And when I said yes, she said, "Show me how you know they're different." And I did, for 20 minutes on the kitchen table with the magnifier, and her mother came and stood behind us, and neither of us noticed for a while. She did not ask where I had lived. She did not ask what I had done. She did not ask whether there was anyone. And I understood by about the 3rd dinner that this was not indifference, because indifference is easy and does not require the level of concentration she was applying. She was working. You could see her doing it. By the 2nd week, I had started keeping a list. Not on paper, in my head the way you do. She eats standing up. Every time. There is a chair, and she uses the chair for about 4 minutes. And then she is up at the counter with the plate in her hand and one hip against the drawers. And her mother says, "Vesper, sit down about twice an evening," and she sits down for another 4 minutes. She says, "Right," before she does anything she does not want to do. Just the one word, quietly to herself, and then she does it. She has a scar across the base of her left thumb, white, about 1.5 inches, which is a rope burn, and which she got at 19, and which she is embarrassed about because it was avoidable. She writes in engineer's block capitals with a bar through the 7, and her spacing is enormous, much wider than the letters need, which means she learned to write on drawings that were going to be photocopied badly. She takes her coat off before she decides anything, and she still, 1,000 times a week, puts 2 fingers flat on a surface before she trusts it. That is the catalog. That is what you do when you are not allowed to ask. The 3rd Thursday it rained. Not the flat gray kind, the other kind, the loud kind. And it came in at about 7, and everyone in the kitchen looked at the window, the way people in a house full of tower work always look at the window. And Juno said something about the marquee, and Vesper said, "Marquee's fine, it's the walk," and went to get the big torch. And I sat at that table with my hands around a mug and thought, this woman has weather in her body. She hears rain and thinks about a 50-meter path between a church door and a farmhouse gate. And I have heard rain for 9 years and thought about a canopy outside a chandler's shop. We were both listening to the same thing. We were not hearing anything like the same thing. I need to tell you about the envelope evening because it is the first time the perimeter bent. 212 envelopes. B's flat. A Tuesday, 4 of us. Me, B, Juno, and Vesper, who had come to drop off a table plan and had been captured. You do not letter 212 envelopes in an evening. I had done them over 9 days, What we were doing was stuffing and sealing, which is mindless, and which is why it is dangerous. At about 9:30, Juno and B went out to the shop for more stamps and did not come back for 40 minutes, and I have never once believed that was accidental. So there we were at a kitchen table with 111 envelopes to go. For about 4 minutes, neither of us said a single word, and the only sound was paper. Then she said, "Your capitals have changed." I want you to appreciate what that was. That is a question about the last 9 years. It is precisely, exactly a question about the last 9 years. Because a hand changes when a life changes. And she knew that because I had told her that at 19 years old in a bell tower, and she had asked it in a form that was technically about lettering. I said, "How?" She said, "They're narrower, and you've stopped the flick on the R." I said, "I do a lot of legal work now. You can't be decorative on a probate document." She said, "Right," and went back to the envelopes. And that was the whole of it. She had got right up to the line, put one hand on it, and then taken the hand off. But she had noticed a serif on an R after 9 years, and I sat there with 111 envelopes and had to do some quite significant work on my face. On the 4th Saturday, I did something I am not proud of. The Lindqvist family book, the one from 1840, needed a new page tipped in for the marriage, and I had it at my flat under weights for 11 days. And one evening, after Marnie had gone to bed, I sat down with it and a magnifier, and I read the last 40 years of it, which had nothing whatever to do with the job. Her father's hand, her mother's, Vesper's own, entered at 14 when she was made a partner, in block capitals, bar through the 7, already spaced too wide, and then in 1999, in the margin beside a christening, in a hand I recognize the way you recognize a smell, my grandmother's. She had lettered for them, after the bell, quietly, for 19 years of no work. Somebody at Lindqvist had kept giving my grandmother the family book. I sat in a kitchen at 11:30 at night and understood that the feud I had had a bond taken out of my hands for had been, on their side, not a feud at all. I did not sleep much that week. Marnie met her on the 11th of May. I had been managing it. I want to say that clearly, because it makes what happened worse. For 6 weeks, I had run a small, tight, exhausting operation with one objective, which was that those two people would not be in a room together. And it had involved a great deal of child-minding arithmetic and 2 lies to my sister. On the 11th of May, the operation failed because a bus did not come. It was the church walkthrough, 4 o'clock on a Sunday, and Marnie's football was canceled at 2. And Rosamond had a hospital appointment. And the bus that would have got Marnie to B's did not come at any point in the following 50 minutes. So I took my daughter to the church. I did the arithmetic on the way, and the arithmetic said it was fine, because Vesper had told Juno on Friday that she was at Marley all day. The truck was in the churchyard. I stood at the lich gate for about 6 seconds with my hand in my daughter's hand, doing the fastest and worst thinking of my adult life. And then B came round the side of the porch and saw us and shouted. And there was no version of the next 30 seconds that involved turning round. Marnie was 8. She was wearing a red anorak with the hood down, and her hair was up in the elastic she does herself, badly, which pulls the front of it back off her face, which means the streak was not partly visible. It was the most visible thing about her from 40 feet. Vesper came out of the porch with a clipboard in one hand. She was talking to somebody over her shoulder. She came down the 2 steps still talking. She got about 4 paces onto the path, and she looked up, and she stopped. I have spent a great deal of my life reading the record a body leaves. I got the whole thing. Her weight went back onto her heels about an inch. The hand with the clipboard came down to her side, and her jaw set. Not a flinch, the opposite. The thing a face does when it is being held shut deliberately from the inside. She looked at Marnie for 4 seconds. Then she looked at me for 1, and then she said, "Right." She came the rest of the way down the path at a completely normal speed. She stopped a proper distance away. She crouched, which put her below my daughter's eye level. And she said, "Hello, I'm Vesper. I do the bells." And Marnie, who is not shy and never has been, said, "Are they loud?" And Vesper said, "Yes. Do you want to see the ropes?" She kept the agreement. I want you to sit with that for a second because I have had to. She stood in a churchyard on the 11th of May and looked at an 8-year-old with a Lindqvist streak in her hair, standing next to a woman she had been bonded to 9 years earlier. And she did the arithmetic. She must have done it. It takes a second. It takes less than a second. And she had given her word in a printer's yard that she would not ask me a single question, so she did not ask. She took my daughter up to the ringing chamber and showed her the ropes and let her hold the tail end of the tenor and told her the names of all 6 bells. And she did not ask that child one question either. Not what her name meant. Not how old she was, not one. She came back down and said the walkthrough was fine and the tower door needed a wedge and she would bring one. Then she got into the truck and drove out of the churchyard, and I watched her stop at the top of the lane for much longer than you need to stop at the top of that lane. B found me sitting on a flat tomb by the wall about 10 minutes later. She said, "She knows." I said, "She's known for about 11 minutes. B said, "She's known since the 11th of March, Nell. She's just never had it in front of her." That night, after Marnie went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the family book and the magnifier, and I did not open either of them. I want to put here, as honestly as I can, what I thought I had learned that day. I thought she looked at a child with her own hair, and she said nothing. And a woman who says nothing when she is shown a thing like that is a woman who has already got a life and is being extremely careful not to be handed a second one. That is what I thought. I was so certain of it that I stopped eating properly for about 4 days. I had it exactly, precisely backwards. And the thing that would have told me was in a shoebox 11 doors down the street, where it had been since the 9th of January 9 years earlier. Because Rosamond Peake does not throw away paper. The wedding was on the 14th of September. On the 29th of August, Rosamond Peake asked me to come and look at a shoebox. She had asked me twice before, in a vague way, over the summer. "There's a box of your grandmother's proofs, you should have them." And I had said yes and not gone, because I was lettering a wedding and raising a child and running an operation. On the 29th, she stopped being vague. She rang at 10 past 8 in the morning and said, "Come today. Rosamond is 74 now. She finished Ambrose's work for 31 years, which means she did the gilding and the edges and the boxes, and she is the only person left alive who worked for my grandmother, my mother, and me. She had the box on the table when I got there. She had also, I noticed, moved the good chair round so that it faced the window, which is what she does when she thinks somebody is going to need to be sitting down and looking at something. She said, "I want to say first that I have had this for 9 years and I did not know what it was." Inside were proofs. Genuinely. 40 years of my grandmother's proofs, the trial pulls, the rejected states, the beautiful failed things. And on top, in a paper wallet, one sheet of Ambrose laid, folded once. Rosamond said, "That was in the waste on the 9th of January. I take the waste. I have taken the waste out of that shop since 1971. And I looked at it, and I could not make it make sense. And I put it in this box, and every year or so I have taken it out and looked at it again." She said, "On Thursday, your sister said the name Lindqvist in my kitchen, and I have not slept properly since." I opened it on the table by the window. 3 lines of text, written out 4 times, one under the other. The undersigned withdraws from all understanding, formal or informal, with the person named, and undertakes to make no further approach. 4 times. With, at the bottom of each, a signature, Nell Ambrose. I had never seen that sheet in my life. I want to slow down here, because this is the 40 seconds that the previous 9 years turn on, and because I did it as a professional, and I want you to see it done as a professional. The first thing I did was not feel anything. That is not bravery, it is training. When I am given a document, I do the reading before I do anything else. Because if you feel first, you will find what you are looking for. So I got the magnifier out of my bag, and I put the sheet flat, and I went along the 4 versions in order. Version 1 is a person finding a hand. The letter forms are close, and the pressure is wrong, too heavy and hesitating at the joins. The way a copy always hesitates, because a copy is a series of decisions and a real hand is not. Version 2 is better, pressure has evened out. Version 3 is very good. Version 4 is letter for letter. My hand at 19. The narrow N, the R with the flick I had not yet stopped doing, the way I closed an A in a hurry, all of it. If you had shown me version 4 on its own, I would have said I wrote it, and then I measured the gaps. I am going to explain this once, properly, because everything after this comes out of it. When I was 19, I was 5'4", and I worked standing at a high bench with the paper flat and my head about 14 inches off it. That gives you a particular gap between letters. Mine was tight, tighter than average, and it stayed tight until my late 20s when I started doing legal work sitting down, and it opened up by a fraction of a millimeter. My mother is 5'10", and has worked seated at a low engraving bench, bent over a glass, since 1986. Her head sits about 8 inches off the work. That is a completely different geometry, and it produces a gap that is wider and, crucially, uneven in a specific way. The gap after a round letter is bigger than the gap after a straight one. Because when you work that close, you are reading the counters and not the stems. You cannot practice that away. You do not know you are doing it. It is not in your hand, it is in your neck. Every gap on that sheet in all 4 versions, including the good one, was my mother's. The room was very quiet. Rosamond said, "What is it?" I said, "It's a practice sheet." She said, "For what?" And I heard myself say from a long way off, "For a letter that got sent." Here is what I understood. Sitting in a chair by a window on the 29th of August, in the following order, over about 90 seconds. That my mother wrote out a repudiation 4 times in my handwriting in the first week of January 9 years ago, after I had refused to sign it, and after she had already put me on the pavement. That she did not need it for the house, because I was already out of the house. That the only possible recipient was the person named. That therefore, at some point in early January, a woman in a canvas work coat opened an envelope on Ambrose-laid paper with our watermark in it, and read 3 lines in my letter form with my signature at the bottom, telling her to make no further approach. And that on the 11th of February, in a car park at Stonebridge, she had a hand on her arm above the elbow and did not move her arm, because 5 weeks earlier I had told her in writing not to come. I put the magnifier down. Then I was sick in Rosamond Peake's kitchen sink, and she held my hair off my face without saying anything at all, which is the second kindest thing anyone has ever done for me, and was also done under a canopy in the rain by a man in a dressing gown. I did not go to my mother. I've been asked about that a great deal since, and the answer is not noble. I did not go to my mother because I did not trust what I would do in that shop, and because there was a considerably more urgent piece of arithmetic in front of me, which was this. If a letter went, then everything I built for 9 years sits on a foundation that was never there, including the thing I told a 5-year-old about her hair. I sat in my car outside Rosamond's for about 20 minutes, and then I did the only thing I could think of, which was that I drove to Marl. She was not at Marl. She was at the church, because it was the 29th of August, and the tenor had to come down and go back up with a new headstock before the 14th, and she had been in that tower since 6:30 in the morning. I got there at 2:20 in the afternoon. The truck was in the churchyard, and the gin was up over the tower door, and I could hear Doggett. I had a sheet of paper in a plastic sleeve on the passenger seat, and I had absolutely no plan whatsoever. She came down at about 2:50. She came out of the tower door into the light with her sleeves pushed back and rust to the elbows, and she saw my car, and she stopped in the doorway, and she said something back over her shoulder to Doggett, and then she came across the grass. She stopped about 11 feet away. She always stopped about 11 feet away. She said, "Is Marnie all right?" Not, "What are you doing here?" Not, "Is B all right?" Her first thought, first sentence, before anything, was the name of a child she had met once for 20 minutes in a ringing chamber and had asked no questions about. And I stood in a churchyard on the 29th of August and had to put my hand on the roof of my own car. We went into the vestry because it was the only room with the door. It is about 10 feet by 12 with a table, 4 stacked chairs, a safe nobody has the code for, and 40 years of parish magazines in a cupboard. It smells of candle grease and damp hymn books. It has one window, high up, facing north. She took her coat off and put it over the back of a chair, which I had learned in 6 weeks meant she had decided something. I put the plastic sleeve on the table and I said, "I need you to look at this, and I need you to not say anything until you have." She read it standing up with both hands flat on the table on either side of it. It took her a long time, longer than reading takes. Then she straightened up and she said, in a voice with nothing in it at all, Where did this come from? I said, the shop waste. The 9th of January. Rosamond kept it. She said, 9 years ago. I said, 9 years ago. And then Vesper Lindqvist put her hand into the inside pocket of a canvas work coat that was hanging over the back of a chair in a vestry, and took out a leather wallet, and took out of the wallet a piece of paper folded into 4, and put it on the table next to the practice sheet. Ambrose laid. Our watermark, 3 lines. The folds were soft. You could see through them where the fiber had gone. That is what 9 years in a coat pocket does to paper, and I know exactly what it does, because knowing what has happened to a piece of paper is my entire profession, she said. It came on the 6th of January. I could not touch it for a second. Then I did what I do, because it is the only thing I have ever had. And I put the 2 sheets side by side and turned them into the light from the north window. Version 4 and the letter are the same document written twice by the same person. Same narrow N, same flick on the R, same closed A, and the same gap after every round letter, wider than mine has ever been. I said, I didn't write it. She said, I know. I want to tell you exactly how she said that, because it is the moment the last 9 years came apart in my hands. She did not say it like a person receiving news. She said it flat and slightly impatient, the way you confirm something obvious. And then she saw my face and understood what she had just done. And she said it again properly. She said, Nell, I have known since the 11th of May. The churchyard, the red anorak, the 4 seconds. She said, I stood on that path and looked at a child with my grandmother's hair, and I did the arithmetic, and I have done it 400 times since, and it comes out the same every time. She is 8. In January, I was told to make no further approach, and you would not have done that. She said, I did not know how. I had spent 9 years being extremely certain that you had, because I had it in writing, and the only way to hold that and hold what I saw on that path at the same time was that somebody else wrote the letter, she said. But I had given you my word in that yard that I would not ask. I said, you could have broken it. And she said, not that one. Then she told me about the gate, and that is the part I still cannot do without stopping. She came on the 30th of December, the day after, not a week after, not when it was convenient. The 30th of December, in the afternoon, because a job at Marl had run and she could not get away before 2. She came to the front of the shop and the shop was shut, and she went round to the house door and rang, and my mother came out and stood inside the gate on the dry side of the railings. And my mother told her that I had gone to a cousin in the north on the 29th, which was, in the narrowest possible sense, not a lie about a place. It was a lie about a direction. And she told her that I had asked her to say so. Vesper said, I asked her for an address. She said you had asked her not to give it. She said, I stood at that gate for about 40 minutes. I said I was 11 doors down. I had been 11 doors down under a chandler's canopy on the 29th. By the 30th of December at 2 in the afternoon, I was in a back bedroom at Rosamond Peaks, with the curtain shut 40 feet from a street that a woman in a canvas coat stood in for 40 minutes. Neither of us said anything for a while after that. She said, eventually, why didn't you call me that night? And I told her the truth, which I had never said out loud to one living person, not to Rosamond, not to Bea. I said, because if you came and looked at the crates and something crossed your face, even for a quarter of a second, I would have seen it and I would have had to carry that instead. I said, so I decided not to find out. And then a letter went, and then I saw a hand on your arm in February, and by then I had a version, and I have lived in it ever since. She said, come here. And I want to be honest about the last 9 years in this one respect. I have imagined that instruction a great many times, and in every version of it I imagined, I hesitated. I did not hesitate. She did not put her arms around me. That is not what happened, and I have thought about why. She put 2 fingers flat against the side of my neck, just the pads, index and middle, laid down the way she lays them on a beam, over the place where a bond mark goes and where mine had been for 9 years under a collar, and she left them there. And she shut her eyes and stood absolutely still, the way you stand when you are listening to a tower to find out whether anything in it is loose. And this is where I have to stop, because what happened next was never meant for YouTube. If you want the uncut version, it's waiting on my Patreon. The link is in the description. We were in that vestry for 2 hours and 10 minutes. Doggett came and knocked once at about 4 and went away again, and the tenor did not go back up that day. And it went up on the 31st instead, with 3 of them working until 9 at night. And Vesper Lindqvist has never once mentioned that to me as a cost. At about 5:30, she said, I want to be in her life, not as your friend. I said, I know. She said, but I am not going to be presented to an 8-year-old as an event. If we do this, we do it slowly, and we do it at her speed. And if it takes 2 years, it takes 2 years. And then she said, there is one thing I want that I would like to do quickly. I said, what? She said, I want to stop being a thing your family denies in public. Which brings us to the 14th of September. I went to the shop on the 1st of September at 8 in the morning because the shop opens at 9 and because I wanted the hour. She was at the bench with the glass down, cutting. She did not look up for about 4 seconds, which is normal and is not rudeness. You finish the stroke. Then she put the graver down and she looked at me. And I watched a woman work out from my face that there was only one thing this could be, and take about 2 seconds to decide to be steady about it. I put the practice sheet on the bench. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, where did you get that? I said, Rosamond took the waist. She has taken the waist out of this shop since 1971. And my mother said, and this is the sentence I will be turning over when I am 80, she said, I should have burned it. Not I didn't do that. Not you don't understand. Not 1 second of denial. Her first instinct after 9 years was a note on her own tradecraft. I said, she came to the gate on the 30th. She said, yes. I said, you told her I'd gone north. She said, yes. I said, I was at Rosamond's 40 feet away. And my mother said, I know where you were. You were at Rosamond's for 9 weeks. I sent her money for the first 4, and she sent it back every time. I had not known that. I want that in here, because I am not going to hand you a woman made of one material. She had known where I was the entire time. She had tried to pay for me. And she had also, in that same fortnight, sat at that bench with the glass down and practiced my handwriting 4 times. She is not 2 women. She is one woman who believed completely that she was saving the 3rd generation of a firm from the family that killed the first, and who was willing to use the only skill she has ever been proud of to do it. That is not a defense. I am not defending her, but if I tell you she was simply cruel, then none of this is a warning to anybody. And I would like it to be a warning. I said, Bee's wedding is in 13 days. I am not going to ruin it, and I am not going to do this in front of her. I said, but Vesper Lindqvist will be at that wedding, and so will I, and you are not going to look through her, and you are not going to look through my daughter. And my mother said, and if I do, I said, then I will read that sheet out loud in the room. She did not come to the rehearsal. The 14th of September was clear and cold and absolutely still, which for that church is a small miracle, because the walk from the lich gate to the porch is 50 meters across open ground, and I have seen a bride's veil go horizontal on it. B got married at 3:10. Juno cried at the vows, extensively and without any dignity whatsoever. And B did not cry at all, and then went completely to pieces at the register, which is exactly the right way round for those two. And I stood at the back with Marnie's hand in mine, near the door, the way I have stood in every room for 9 years. Except that at some point during the second reading, I noticed that I was not in fact near the door because I wanted to be near the door. I was near the door because I had been putting myself near doors since I was 19 years old. And it had stopped being a decision about 6 years ago and become a piece of furniture, like not speaking to my mother. The register is the part I did. 211 years of that parish in one book, and a page tipped in by me, and B and Juno signed it at the table by the north window at about 3:20, while everyone stood up and could not see anything. And when they had signed it, Juno turned round with the pen still in her hand and said, in a completely normal speaking voice, to the whole church, Vesper, come and witness. That was not the plan. There was a plan, and it had a different name on it. Juno Lindqvist has the emotional radar of a lamppost, and she has never once needed it because she operates on something better, which is that she does the obvious kind thing at speed and lets everybody else catch up. So Vesper came up the side aisle. She was in a gray coat. She had washed the rust off. She came up the side aisle, and at the third pew from the back she stopped, level with us, and did not go on. 200 people were standing up and looking at a table by the north window. She looked at my daughter, and she said, out loud, at ordinary volume, in a completely quiet church, I'm not going anywhere. Here is what she was doing. And I did not understand it for about 4 seconds either. She was not saying it to me. She had spent 6 weeks not asking an 8-year-old a single question. She had said she would not be presented as an event, and that we would go at that child's speed if it took 2 years. And so she did not say, this is your mother's alpha. And she did not say, I am your anything. She said the only sentence available that was entirely true, that promised nothing, that demanded nothing, and that an 8-year-old could put in her pocket and take out later. And she said it in front of 200 people. In the church her family have hung the bells in since 1840. Standing next to a woman her sister-in-law's family had spent 9 years pretending she had never touched. Marnie looked up at her and said, "Are they going to ring the bells now?" And Vesper said, "Yes, all 6. And put her hand out, palm up, at the height of an 8-year-old's hand, and waited. She waited, she did not take it, until my daughter put her hand into it. My mother was 4 rows in front, and she turned round. I'm not going to tell you that she smiled, because she did not. Adela Ambrose stood in a pew in a gray wool coat and looked at a Lindqvist holding her granddaughter's hand in front of 200 people. And her face did something I had never seen it do, which was nothing at all. No set jaw, no arranged expression, none of the enormous competence she brings to every second of her life. She just looked for a long time. Then she turned back around and faced the front, and she stayed for the whole of the rest of it. And at the reception, she came over to the table where Marnie was eating a bread roll, and she said to Vesper, "You'll want the family book back. I've had it since March. Nell tipped the page in," which is not an apology. It is 9 years away from being an apology. But she said it in front of people, and she said the name, and she did not look through either of them. And I had told her exactly what the price of doing otherwise was, and she believed me. And I think she was right too. They rang all 6 at 20 to 4. You could feel it in the flat tomb by the wall. Marnie put both hands over her ears and laughed like a drain and would not go inside. I told her at the end of October, on an ordinary Tuesday at the kitchen table with no ceremony at all, because Vesper was right about the speed and because there is no good day for it. She was 8.5. She listened. She asked 3 questions. And the third one was the only one that mattered, which was, did she know about me? And I got to say no. And then I got to say the rest of it, which is that on the day she found out, she came down a path at a normal speed and crouched down below eye level and asked whether you wanted to see the ropes. Marnie thought about that for a while. Then she said, "Is that why she does the thing with her fingers on the table?" I said, "No, that's bells." And she said, "It's not though, she only does it when it's important." 8 years old, 9 weeks of knowing the woman. And she had built a catalog. There is one more thing, and then I am done. In March, Vesper took the tenor down at a church out past the reservoir for a rehang, and the inscription band came off with it, and it wanted relettering, and she brought the rubbing to the shop. To the shop, not to me at the printer's. To Ambrose and Son at 8:10 in the morning, because the door was unlocked and because she is a person who tries doors. My mother was at the bench. I am told, because I was not there, I was at the school gate, that my mother looked at the rubbing for about 90 seconds and said the wear was all on the upper serifs, and that water had been getting in from above for 60 years, and that whoever cut it had been left-handed and shorter than she was. And that Vesper said, "How can you possibly know that last one?" And that my mother said, "The gaps. They are not friends. They will not be. Some things do not knit." But there is a Lindqvist docket on the Ambrose bench most weeks now, and the name goes on the fascia of nothing. And my grandmother's magnifier is on that bench. And I have decided that is the shape this particular repair is going to take. She moved in on the 2nd of November, which was not planned and which neither of us noticed until about a week afterwards, when Marnie pointed it out at breakfast in the tone of a person reporting a fact everybody else has been slow about. She eats standing up. I have given up. She still puts 2 fingers flat on the kitchen counter before she says anything difficult, and I still notice it every single time. And last Thursday she did it, and then said we ought to get the gutter looked at before the winter. And I sat at my own table in my own kitchen and had to put my hand over my mouth for a second because there was a night 9 years ago when a gutter went over in 3 places and I stood under it doing arithmetic on 4 sheets of paper. She saw it. She always sees it. She came round the table and put 2 fingers flat against the side of my neck and left them there. And she said it again, the way she has said it every single time since, which is quietly, and to me, and as a matter of fact, rather than a promise, I'm not going anywhere.